guys, so today we have my buddy's 2015 Chevy Silverado in here. We got a little suspension kit for it. We got a 3.5 inch rough country suspension lift. It's gonna be 3.5 in the front and 1 3/4 in the rear. It'll give this thing a good stance. We're gonna do upper control arms and different struts in the front, as well as U-bolt blocks and U-bolts in the back. We got some 20x12 hostile wheels, look pretty sweet. Toyo open country and RTs, they look pretty nice. Here's the kit. Got our upper control arms, new shocks, new coil springs, our new struts. We'll get the coil springs swapped over. I'll show you how to do that. We'll get going on this thing. First things first here, we're going to want to jack it up on the frame, not on the control arms, because we're going to be taking those down to get the struts out. So just, if you guys are at home, you don't have a lift, just put some jack stands underneath the frame right here to suspend the front suspension. We're going to start by getting this splash shield off of here. Looks like some 15mm bolts. We'll get that off, and we'll get the wheels off, and then we'll move on to getting the tie rods off. All right guys, so we have 21mm here. Take it loose, but don't take it all the way off, because we want to protect the threads, because we're going to have to hit this knuckle. Now you want to hit the knuckle part of it, you don't want to hit the tie rod up here. We're trying to break this, I don't know what you want to call it, seal in between here when the two press together. So we want to hit it on the knuckle itself, right up in here like this. Give it a couple pops like that, and then it comes loose. And just spin your nut off, and the tie rod's off. But see how it's got this tapered part to it right here? You got to get it out of that hole in here. So just give it a good tap with a hammer. Make sure you have your nut on there to protect the threads. We're gonna start getting this stuff off of this control arm. So we're gonna undo this clip. You just stick your pocket screwdriver in there like this, and then pry out, pry up. Kind of hard to do one-handed here. There we go. Okay, so now we got that loose. And we need to take our 10mm socket, pull that bolt out. That takes the bracket off for the brake line. So now that's free. This is free. And I'm also going to take this line off up here. Let me switch sockets here. 13mm on this one, guys. And right in here. Pull that bolt out like that. Now all this is nice and free, because we're going to need to pry this whole thing out once we undo this upper ball joint. But right now we're going to take in, it's a 15mm wrench on top and a 15mm on an impact on the bottom. I'm going to take this sway bar loose. Do that on both sides, and then we'll move on to getting the upper ball joint off. Okay, so we got the sway bar link off here, both sides. Now we need to get our 18mm ratchet wrench, ideally, if you got it, and work this upper ball joint nut loose. And then we're going to do the same thing we did with the tie rod, and we're going to hit the knuckle, not the control arm here. We're going to hit the knuckle with a hammer to get that to separate. So don't take this nut all the way loose, because there may be a little bit of spring pressure. There shouldn't be, because it's all the way loaded down, but just in case, keep that nut on there a couple of turns, and then you can back it off once we get the separation that we need. So get that separated, and then pull that nut all the way off, and then we'll be able to move the knuckle out. So now we're going to move up top here. We're going to open the engine, and we are going to open the hood there and get in here in the engine bay, and we need to get to these 3 18mm upper strut bolts. Take those out on both sides, and then we're going to move down here. We're going to take these, I think they're 15mm off here on the strut, so we can get the strut pulled out of here. The strut out of here now. I actually put a bungee cord on here to just keep this ABS wire and this brake line loose. You don't want them to be holding the whole control arm up, so I just put a little bungee cord on here to kind of hold it in the meantime. Next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to mark our cams on this upper control arm for alignment purposes when we go back together, to make it a lot easier to get a rough idea of where to start when we do our alignment. So you can see right here where I marked the inside and the outside of the cams there. That's a 21 millimeter. We'll pull them off, we'll get them old ones off, and then we'll get ready to put the new ones on. Alright, now that the upper control arms are off, we're going to hold on putting the new ones in. We're going to actually come down here. We're going to take this cross member off. Part of this kit involves dropping the differential to reduce this angle on the CVs. So we have to take these 4 18 millimeter bolts off and pull this cross member out. And then we're going to have to cut part of it to allow clearance for the rear end to drop. And I'll show you how to do that once we get it out. But 4 18 millimeter bolts and pull that cross member out, take it over to the bench so we can work with it. Alright, so we got the cross member over here on the bench, guys, and something that we're going to want to do right away is they put this coating on this stuff, which is great, keeps it from rusting, but we can't really make marks when we got a rubberized coating. So I just took some brake cleaned off the area where I'm going to be working at, and then we're going to want to flip it so that the holes are showing like this. And then you'll notice here that this is angled. It's at an angle there. So we're going to want to hook that on the bottom side. We're going to want to measure and make marks at 4.5 and 8 inches long. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take a square, put a square on here like this, right up against the bottom edge. We're going to measure here, and we want a 1/4 inch up onto the bar there. So 1/4 inch up from the bottom. So the distance between your square and that mark should be a 1/4 inch on both sides. Do that both sides there. And we're going to flip it over, and we're going to do the same thing on the back side here. We're going to take the square, put it up against the back of it there. We're going to take our tape measure, and we want 2 inches right there. It's 2 inches from the back side and a 1/4 inch from the front side. This comes in your instruction manual, so it shouldn't be, it's pretty easy to follow. And then basically just connect the dots and then get a cutoff wheel, and we will cut that section out of there. This is what it looks like when you're all done, guys. Just cut that little plate out of there just like that. I took a little deburring tool and got all the burrs off the back side of it and just kind of cleaned it up. And then what I'll do is I'll hit this with a Scotch-Brite, and I'll get some paint in here to try to help keep that from rusting out. So get this cleaned up, we'll get it painted, and then while it's drying we'll get the differential drop down and go. Okay guys, so next step here is we're gonna have to work on dropping this diff. I already got mine done. I kind of was in a hurry and I didn't catch grabbing the GoPro here, but there's one bolt right here. It's an 18 millimeter on the bottom, and then it's gonna be a 15 millimeter on the top. Same thing right here. There's one right there, one over here, and one right here. And you can see I got the spacers in it already. You can see the spacers up there. It comes with new bolts. You can see the spacers on that one. Same thing over here. So the spacers are in it. Now, something I would suggest doing, I used like a kind of an old transmission jack like this. Put it up underneath of here. Take all the bolts out, take the 4 bolts out, drop it down as far as you can get it to go. Get all the bolts out of it, and then pick it back up. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to come in here and grind this off on these 2 cooling fins right here that come right next to the the frame there. And what I did was I jacked it up, and of course you can't get anything in there to grind it. So I actually used a file, slow boat to China, and I just went in there like back and forth like this on it. And I ended up taking probably, I'd say 3/16 of an inch off. But what I do is, you can see where I marked it with a red Sharpie, and then that's about 1/8 of an inch, and then take that off and then mark it again and do it another time, and then you should be about good. So got to make sure we make enough clearance in there that's not hitting. And so now we got that done. I do have my cross member painted here. Like I said, I shot some paint in there so it wouldn't rust. I used like a it's actually like a truck bed liner too, so it kind of matches a little bit. So we'll get that stuff back up in there and we'll keep rolling. Alright guys, so now we've moved on to, we are getting ready to install these new struts. On this, guys, I would highly suggest you take this to somebody that has one of these strut machines. You can buy those ones, and I've even used them before we had this, that they clamp on here, but it's pretty sketchy, and this is really kind of a sketchy deal here unless you have one of these machines. But if you are using these machines, one of these machines, it's just you got to get your angles right on these bottom three here, because the spring wraps around, so the ones are going to be a little higher than the other ones. And these top ones, the little clamps go right over this top plate here. And then once your strut's loose off of the thing there, off of the spring, you can just put some PB on that, and we'll pull this nut off. We'll bring our other one over, push it up in. We're going to want to make sure we make a mark where we're at here in line with this, so that everything lines back up. So I'm going to make a mark on this one, on this bracket here, and then I'm going to make a mark up here and on here, so I can transfer that over to my new ones, so everything lines back up to straight. Because we got to have this in here at the right angle, because if it's off, then we won't be able to get it back in the truck easily. So right there, gotta make sure we get that in there. All right, so we got our new struts installed with our new 15mm bolts and our new nuts on the top up here. Got all of our things clamped back down on there. Now we're just going to basically put our upper control arms back in at the marks that we marked with our bolts there to line those marks back up, and just put this front end back together. We're gonna put our sway bar back on. We're gonna put our tie rod on, or like I said, our upper control arm and upper ball joint, and get all this stuff put back. Alright guys, so we're moving to the back now. We're doing our back rear suspension blocks, and the first thing you're going to do is jack the vehicle up. And if you got a lift like this, you're going to want to jack it on the frame. If you don't have that, just jack it up off the differential, and then put some jack stands underneath the frame. But make sure you leave enough room to put that 3-inch block in there. So make sure you leave enough room when you pick the vehicle up to be able to drop the back end down. So my thing I would say to do is get the tires about 4 inches off the ground when you put the jack stands on, when it's fully extended, and then put a jack underneath it here, and then you can let it down that extra 4 inches to get your blocks in. Now before you let it down, I would undo your ABS sensor, which goes in right here. It's just a little clip. Pull that off. Same thing over here on the other side, pull that one off. Also take this 13mm bolt out up here to allow your brake lines to move so that they don't get pulled tight either. So take that, once again, just make sure you get your ABS wires off, and just make sure nothing's hanging real tight when you go to let that down. And then just put your block in. There's going to be a pin on the leaf spring, and that goes in your hole on the top, and then the pin in the block goes in the rear end. And then always, as always, we want to make sure the shorter side is up front and the longer side is out back, to tilt the rear end up to make our drive shaft angle good to go. And we're just going to put our new U-bolts on with the new hardware and button it up, and then put our sensors back in where they're supposed to go. Put this bolt in up here, and then you should be good to go. Back here it's pretty simple. Up front's the tougher stuff, but back here it's pretty easy. So just make sure, the biggest thing is make sure you got your box in here flat, and square is the biggest thing there. Make sure you get them in there good and you should be good to go. And then we also got our new shocks. Shocks mount up here. It's a 21 millimeter on the top. That's just a bolt, there's no nut. Just put an impact on here, zip that off. And this is a 21 millimeter on the impact and a 21 millimeter wrench down here on the bottom. And then as always, make sure that the boots are up. This kit doesn't come with boots, I don't know why, but this is the old shock, but it sits in here like this with the shaft of the shock facing upwards. So make sure you double check that. I'll show you what it looks like when we get it all put back together. So this is what it looks like when we're all done, guys. We got the blocks in there. We got our harnesses put back where they need to be. Little trick here, when you do these U-bolts, always tighten your U-bolts in an X pattern. Tighten, you know, front, back, tighten them like this. And then when you're done, all of the threads sticking out of the bolts should be about the same. You want to make sure you look for that. They're all evenly tightened on both sides. So same thing over here. Make sure all your studs are sticking out evenly. That way you know you got it all torqued down good. We got our ABS wire back on. We got our shock in here. We get the stickers put on that, and then we got our bolt back up here on top of the diff cover for the brake line. And we got our other shock in over here. Pretty simple back here in the back, guys. Not a big deal. But definitely just be careful when you're picking things up, and make sure you watch all the stuff hanging off the diff to make sure you don't hurt anything there. But that about wraps this up. This one's good.